Hello everyone and welcome to the next lecture of our Silk Road chapter project, and today we will talk about the early civilizations of Central Asia, Bactria, Sogdiana and Khorezm, covering the period of the first half of the first millennium BC till the 4th century BC, when the army of Alexander the Great reached this region. This land they lay on the crossroads of ancient civilizations, and they played a major role in shaping local economy, culture and history development of Central Asia. And today we will talk about their culture, economy, political structure, religion and their relationship with Achaemenid Empire. So what time are we talking about? More specifically, it's the first millennium BC, before Alexander the Great came to this land, and his campaign took place from 329 to 327 BC. It was a very dynamic time for Central Asia. The first states started to emerge, the trade network slowly took place, and the Persian Empire expanded into the region. There were three main regions that we're dealing with: Khorezm, Bactria and Sogdiana. Geographically, Khorezm was located in the western Uzbekistan and northern Turkmenistan. Then Bactria, it was located in the northern Afghanistan and southern Uzbekistan. And the last one, Sogdiana, it was located in the central Uzbekistan and western Tajikistan. And these three kingdoms, they were not the kingdoms as we understand them now. Instead, they were the network of fortified towns and agricultural communities that were connected with each other through trade, marriage alliances and shared religious traditions. Defense was a constant concern. That's why the majority of the towns, they were surrounded by the high mud brick walls to keep them safe. In many ways, they were the loose confederations of settled and nomadic groups, and the borders, they shifted depending on the alliances and migrations. Because nomadic people, they moved seasonally, while the settled population, they stayed in one place, tied closely to their rivers and oases. It's important to understand that these state formations, they didn't appear overnight. Archaeological evidence from such places as Khorezm in western Tajikistan or Jarkutan in southern Uzbekistan show that proto-urban settlements, they already existed in the Bronze Age, like in the 2nd millennium BC. And by the 10th, 8th century BC, these settlements, they already formed into the stable societies. We can see like the early appearances of the social stratification, temple architecture, or even the basic system of writing or symbolic communication, especially in Bactria. The population of this region was made up of Iranian-speaking people, but be careful, when we say Iranian-speaking, don't think about modern Iran or Farsi language, because the family of Iranian language, it's very ancient and extremely big and consists of many different branches. The people who belong to the same family of languages, they may not even understand each other. And the biggest Iranian-speaking group that still lives in Central Asia is Tajik people. Sogdiana is probably the most familiar region to the people outside Central Asia. The first mentioning of Sogdian people we can find in Avesta, the ancient book of Zoroastrian people, which dates back to the 1st millennium BC. Sogdian people, they lived along the Zarafshan River, which still flows through Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. Sogdians cultivated wheat, rice, grapes, they raised livestock, and they lived along the nomadic tribes of Saka and Masaget, which in the Roman and Greek sources are more famous as Scythians. Sogdiana also played a great role in the spread of technologies. Early irrigation system, or canals, underground channels, were used here, or maybe were even invented here. And this irrigation system made agriculture possible here in the local dry climate. As we discussed in our first lecture, without irrigation here, it's not possible to develop any agriculture. Plus, because Sogdians, they lived between the nomadic tribes and also settled people to the south, they absorbed the ideas from both of the sides and made something uniquely Sogdian. Sogdiana is closely associated with Samarkand. In antiquity, it was known as Afrosiab. The city was founded in the 8th century BC, which makes it roughly the same age as Rome. Samarkand is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the whole world, and also the oldest in Central Asia because it's around 3,000 years old. The ruins of Afrosiab, they still can be visited in the northern parts of Samarkand, and the archaeological research has been carried out there for almost 150 years. Samarkand wasn't the only one important city in Sogdiana. Another urban centers as Bukhara, Kanka, Paikent, they also played key role in the local trade, administration and defense. A lot of these cities, they were constructed on the raised platforms to protect them from seasonal flooding, especially from Zarafshan River, and in many of that cities there was a citadel where the local ruler or tribal leader, they lived and governed. The most famous chapter in the history of Sogdiana is the time of the Great Silk Road. But even before the Great Silk Road became a formal network, Sogdiana already functioned as a big east-west corridor. Lapis lazuli from Badakhshan, tin from Pamirs, and probably even silk from China already passed through Sogdiana as early as the 6th century BC. Long before Han Dynasty officially opened the Great Silk Road, Sogdian merchants already were intermediaries between China, India and Mediterranean world. Sogdian communities settled as far as China, and the Sogdian language even became the lingua franca of the Silk Road, and the archaeological evidences from such places as Dunhuan or Laoyan in China show how mobile these merchant communities were. They often formed enclaves with their own temples and inscriptions, preserving their culture while supporting the long-distance trade. Now about Bactria. Bactria, it was another major regional power comparable in its importance to Sogdiana. Geographically, it was located in the northern Afghanistan, southern Uzbekistan and southern Tajikistan. Its capital was Bactra or Balkh in modern Afghanistan. Life in Bactria revolved around agriculture along Amu Darya River, but its position between Central Asia and India made it a natural trading hub. And the trading here very often it happened in the shape of barter, for example spices in exchange for semi-precious stones, because coins they were not yet widespread. Coins began to appear here during Achaemenid Empire, but even then a lot of remote zones they still functioned without any monetary economy. Bactria was probably the most cosmopolitan of all three regions. It was located at the crossroads of Iran, India and Central Asia, and it absorbed influences from all three regions. Archaeologists they found Indian-style figurines, Persian administrative tools, and even the Central Asia horse equipment at their archaeological sites. And militarily, Bactria was also crucial because it controlled the key passes that were leading to the Hindu Kush and the Pamirs. Khorezm is very often overlooked in the Western historical narratives. Bactria and Sogdiana they tend to receive more attention because they connected to the major historical events, for example, the invasion of Alexander the Great. Khorezm, on the contrast, it was located deep in the desert and it relied on its isolation as a natural defense. Yes, it helped it to survive, but at the same time, it meant less mentioning in the written resources. In the Avesta, the book of Zoroastrian people, Khorezm is referred as Khorezm, which means the land of sun. Agriculture was a backbone of life here. The region lay along the lower course of Amu Darya River, which previously divided into many branches near Aral Sea. Yes, today the river carries much less water, but the researchers estimate that Khorezm used to have up to 4 times more cultivated land than it does now. Khorezm became a very important center of the urban development, even though its larger city they appeared in a later period of time, approximately from the 4th to the 2nd centuries BC, but a lot of small settlements they existed before, all dependent on the access to water. If Amu Darya changed its course, and it happened very often in the Khorezm history, the city just ceased to exist. The cycle repeated itself very often in the local history. Khorezm was an early adopter of the fortified urban planning. Such places as Toprak Kala, even though they reached its peak in the later centuries, but they have foundations, they go back to this early state period. These places had multi-room palaces, big storage facilities, proto-temples, pointing to a complex social structure supported by agricultural surplus. The people of Khorezm, they always had a very strong sense of independence, probably shaped by their remote desert position. Even after the invasion of Persian Empire, Khorezm became the first region to gain its independence, and by the time when the Alexander the Great came here, they already had local dynasties. One of the rulers of Khorezm, Farasman, he even proposed the alliance with Alexander the Great. Even to this day, Khorezm people have a very strong attachment to their regional identity and take pride in their ancient history. Khorezm's relative independence also allowed to serve as a cultural refuge. When the invasion swept through Bactria and Sogdiana, people and traditions they often found shelter in Khorezm. The researchers they even believe that it helped to preserve some certain forms of Central Asian Zoroastrianism, ritual architecture, and clan-based social structure much longer than in the other regions. The dominant religion across these early states was Zoroastrianism. There are still several theories where it originated, with Bactria and Sogdiana being the most commonly mentioned. It is believed that the prophet of this religion, Zoroaster, began preaching somewhere in Central Asia in the early 1st millennium BC. His exact birthplace and dates they are still unknown, but his influence is undeniable. Zoroastrianism religion and the burial practices were very widespread in Western Central Asia, and later it even became the state-sponsored religion in Iran for almost 1,000 years. And here in Central Asia, this religion was very influential till the invasion of Arabs in the beginning of 8th century. Some scholars also suggest that Mithraism, a mystical religion that based on the cult of a god Mithra, also had roots in Central Asia. Originally, Mithra he was a Persian deity which was connected to the justice, contracts, and the sun. His cult may have developed through the Central Asian traditions connected to celestial observations and seasonal cycles. And this mix of sky worship and ethical belief system reflect the deep spiritual background of the region. Fire temples in Sogdiana and Bactria, they were not only religious places, they were more like communities where legal matters were discussed, where calendars were maintained, and the education took place. A lot of that temples they housed the sacred fires that were burning for generations. This tradition it survived in some regions even after the spread of Islam. Alongside these organized religions, the local animistic and polytheistic beliefs were very widespread. Rivers, mountains, natural forces were very often worshipped, and these beliefs were often blended with the new religions which were brought by conquerors. For example, during the Hellenistic period, the Greek deities were incorporated in the local religious practices, but we will talk about it in our next lectures. The Persian invasion was the first major conquest after Sogdiana, Khorezm, and Bactria were formed. It started in the 6th century BC under the rule of Cyrus II. Some regions submitted peacefully, while the others were fighting back fiercely, especially Massaget tribes led by the queen Tomyris. According to the legend, Cyrus II he was killed in the battle, and Tomyris she ordered to put his head in the bag full of blood, and she said, "You wanted blood, so drink it." She remains one of the most iconic figures in Central Asian history. Another local hero is Shirak. When Darius I attempted to conquer the territories of Saka tribes in 519, his army was approached by a man who claimed he could guide them to the back of Saka army by the secret routes. To earn the Darius' trust, he deliberately mutilated his face and said that he wanted revenge on his people. He took the Persian army deep into the desert where they ran out of water and died. Yes, of course, Shirak later was executed, but he still remains one of the most famous local heroes. Under Darius I, Bactria, Sogdiana, and Khorezm were fully incorporated into the state of Achaemenid Persian Empire, and these regions they were even mentioned in Behistun inscription, where Darius names 23 states that he conquered, like Babylon, Egypt, Elam, Assyria, and Khorezm, Bactria, and Sogdiana. And the warriors from Bactria, they, for example, were fighting as far away from this region as Egypt, where they were valued as very skillful soldiers. How far east did the Persian advance? Well, that we don't know for sure, but the researchers and scholars, they claim that they came to the modern-day Tajikistan, where Cyrus founded the city named Seropolis. And the scholars, they still debate whether that place corresponds to the local Hujand or Zarafshan, but there is no one answer and research still continues. The region was divided into satrapies or provinces, each governed by the satrap appointed by the king. The local aristocracy probably ruled in the smaller districts. And Achaemenids, they were always famous for their strict administration, especially in taxation. In Khorezm, Bactra and Sogdiana, the taxes were often paid in agricultural produce or livestock, since the coinage was very limited. The integration into Achaemenid system went far beyond symbolism. The roads, storehouses and garrisons were constructed all over the empire. And even though the royal road is more famous in the western part of the empire, its eastern branches probably went up to Bactria and even Sogdiana. This infrastructure allowed for the faster troop movement, better tax collection, and also the better control over the nomadic tribes which lived along the border. The Achaemenid rulers did not treat all the regions equally. Khorezm, because of its isolation, was difficult to control. Sogdiana, on the contrary, was much easier to manage because of its urban centers. And Bactria, even though it was the most important, but it was the most difficult. Yes, it was famous for the very good soldiers, but also was very prone to rebellion. That's why very often the Achaemenid rulers, they appointed their relatives to rule in this region. Central Asia remained a part of Achaemenid Empire for around 200 years. By the 4th century BC, the empire started to weaken and they started to lose control. This created a kind of the power vacuum which led Sogdiana, Bactria and Khorezm to gain more economical and political independence. The final turning point came with Alexander the Great, who, after he defeated Persian Empire, he came to Central Asia and was campaigning here for several years. But we will talk about it in our next lecture. The history of the early Central Asian states maybe is not as famous as the history of Tamerlane or later empires, but it is absolutely crucial because it laid the groundwork for the political and cultural centers of Khorezm, Bactria and Sogdiana, the regions that would shape the history of Central Asia not for centuries but for millennia. And unfortunately, this era is very often overlooked. That's exactly why it deserves a very close attention. If you enjoyed this lecture, please like, comment, follow and share it with your families and everyone who loves history. And see you on our next lecture.